Hello and welcome to the Destiny Forum. My name is Mbanyane Muhango and I'm glad that you tuned in. And I hope you've invited your friends, your workmates, your spouse, your children, just to come around so we can share some thoughts from the page of the scriptures as we reflect on the idea of destiny. Before we dive into the topic of this particular presentation, I'd like for us just to remind ourselves some of the things we've covered thus far. When we began this series, we looked at the idea of decision. Precisely, we said decisions determine destinies. The decisions we make on a daily basis, whether it's in marriage, in our career, in the Christian life, etc., they determine what we're going to be tomorrow, for the next decades, etc. And so it is imperative and critical, if you will, for us to reflect on those decisions, to take time to make sure that we're making the right decisions, because they are going to put us on the path of where we are going to be, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Whatever decisions we made, that's going to end up influencing where we're going to be tomorrow. And we also looked at the idea that since decisions determine destinies, in a sense here we are acknowledging that destiny is to a large extent our own making. And let me clarify that, okay? The Bible tells us that God has plans for us, a good future. He told the children of Israel, and by extension those of us who are Gentiles, been engrafted into the faith, the same benefits, if you will, by reason of Christ. We can also make the same claim. God has a plan for us. But that notwithstanding, there is a role that we play as human beings in enabling that destiny to come to be, whatever God purposed for us, whatever God planned for us. And so it is very important for us to make sure that we do not just stand on what God has ordained for us, but make sure we're also doing something to enable that destiny to come to be or to come to pass. So this brought us to this kind of understanding that destiny really is by design. Okay? It's by design. The design here has a dual size, the divine side and the human side. And so it is critical that every day we wake up and we are counted among the living, we take the opportunity to enable ourselves really to ensure that whatever the activities we are doing, undertaking, wherever we find ourselves, how we are investing our time in a given day, in any kind of activity, we are essentially shaping our own destiny. And thereafter, we reflected on the idea that discipline also decorates destiny. Discipline decorates destiny. The idea of decorating here is to make something better, make something much more appealing, okay? Distinguishing it, as it were. So discipline has to do with us following through the protocols, doing what is necessary for us to get somewhere else. And for example, in the academy, if you're going to succeed in a course, you have to take all the courses that are required. Of course, we may have other courses that are electives. Those, they leave you with the choice really to determine which ones you want to pick. But for the most part, really, the curriculum is already, designated for us, okay? It is already structured. So you have to follow through with those academic protocols in order for you to be considered to have succeeded in that academic program. But more importantly here, discipline has to do with you and I making up our mind really to follow through with something, doing what is necessary, not comfortable. Doing that which is necessary, but not comfortable, as it were. If you look for comfort, you may not really be considered as someone who is disciplined. A person who is disciplined really does something because it has to be done. It is necessary, it is imperative that it had to be done. Whether that really costs me some level of comfort or pleasure, etc. We also notice from what Christ says, if anybody wants to follow me, let him deny himself and follow me. Take up the cross and then follow me. The idea of denying ourselves, whatever our body wants, the flesh maybe craves for, and or taking up the cross. These are not pleasurable ideas, as it were. And yet, if we're going to follow Christ, that's what is expected of us. That's what discipline is all about. This day, allow us to push forward here as I'm going to be looking at the idea of dexterity. Dexterity. Dexterity has to do with skill, your know-how, something, your expertise, something, whether it may be by gift, spiritual gift, or that of course by the end of the year you also have to develop it, or must be maybe a skill that you have developed by virtue of studying or working hard, whatever the case might be. That's dexterity. And I want to say that dexterity, in that sense, designates destinies. Okay? Dexterity designates destiny. In other words, what you know really is what you're known for. What you are equipped to do, your skill set really, they are the ones that designate you to a particular destiny, to a particular outcome, to a particular really place, if you will. To designate is to locate you, okay? Is to identify you with a particular destiny. In other words, once you acquire a particular skill or a particular expertise, that in essence, that you are assuming, you are stepping into your own destiny. There are no two ways about it. And we're going to observe from the pages of the scriptures how this particular notion can be explicated and certainly emulated from all the other biblical characters who also made progress in that sense. Now, the good thing you remember on this particular program, the ideas we share here, they're not just out of our own maybe human ingenuity here. We're talking about, these are thoughts that are biblically rooted, okay? They are grounded in the scriptures, grounded in the Bible, okay? So it's just talking here to psych you up. No, but it's to enable us to be grounded in the scriptures, the truth of the scriptures here, and see how we can attain. Remember also our motto of destiny. It is Christ, the greatest man that ever lived. That's why when we look at Christ in primarily, that we're able to know what we need to do so we can find ourselves in the next level or whatever we want to be in life. Now, as we begin today, I'd like to invite you to read with me from 1 Timothy chapter 5. I'll focus on chapter number 2, verse number 5. 1 Timothy chapter number 2, verse number 5. I'm reading the New King James Version, okay? So 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse number 5. Apostle Paul writes to his spiritual protege, Timothy. Observe these words. He says, for there is one God and one mediator between God and men. Who is this man? The man Christ Jesus. Who gave himself, verse number 6, a ransom for all to be testified in due time. What's going on here? So, Christ, in a sense we can say here, he's the one who has the skill, the know-how, the dexterity to save mankind. One man. No other human being, no other personality would have accomplished this. And so the dexterity, as far as salvation is concerned, the key resides with this man, Jesus of Nazareth. Elsewhere, the book tells us, John 14:6, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So, in essence here, the dexterity of Christ, his own skill set, what he is, okay, as this Son of God, created, as it were, his own destiny. That's why we say there is no other name given unto man by which we are saved. It is through Christ. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and given him a name that is above all other names. At the mention name Christ, every knee should bow. But what's going on? Why is Christ being accorded this kind of decorative metaphors, as it were? It is because salvation is through no other person. His ability, his capability is what enabled us to be saved, as it were. And so, watch this. So when we say dexterity designates destiny, what we really also mean here is to say your dexterity creates demand. Your dexterity, your skill, your expertise, your know-how, technical know-how creates demand. Let me put it another way here. If you're employed, the reason you're employed where you're employed is because you have a particular skill. There is a demand for your skill. There is a demand for your knowledge. There is a demand for your expertise. And in fact, your compensation, your salary, your wages, whatever you are paid really commensurate to the expertise, the knowledge you have. Not two ways about that. Now, if that is the case, let me ask you a question. What kind of expertise do you have? Or to be much more precisely, in keeping with the theme of this particular presentation, what sort of dexterity are you identified with? What sort of knowledge, what sort of understanding, what sort of skill are you identified with? If you can answer that question, then you may have a clue as to where your destiny is. Very important. And so we're going to observe some other biblical characters besides Christ and see how they were able also to actualize, to experience, achieve their own destiny, okay, by virtue of dexterity. Remember here, you gotta be careful. So dexterity, it can be as a result of the spiritual gift, which of course doesn't preclude you and my involvement. We have to work to develop the particular gift as well. But in addition to that, there is also the human side of dexterity, human side of expertise, skill. That's why you study to show yourself approved, a workman who does not need to be ashamed, but rightly dividing the word of truth. Okay? Let's pick up one person here from the book of Genesis. Let's refer to the man called Joseph. In chapter number 41 of the book of Genesis, chapter 41 of the book of Genesis, let's observe these words as we make progress in this particular presentation. In the Old Testament book of Genesis, chapter 41, I'm going to read from verse 38 in the interest of time. Genesis chapter 41, I'm reading from verse number 38. Observe these words. Let me begin from verse number 37. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? What is happening? Pharaoh had a dream, and there was no way to interpret the dream. All the other folks actually who were working, they were designated to interpret dreams and save the king and all that. In fact, they were working because of their expertise, as we are arguing here. But a time came, the dream that Pharaoh had, there was no other person to interpret it. Who showed up? Joseph. In fact, he had been doing that even in the prison. Listen, dexterity, even in the most deplorable place, dexterity, your skill, your knowledge is what is going to lift you from there to another place. That's why dexterity designates you. So dexterity, the ability to interpret dreams that God had blessed Joseph with, designated him to become the prime minister of Egypt. In fact, he was transferred from the prison. He said, no, you don't belong here. You don't have to be here. You belong to a different place altogether. And he found his place. Friends, the government of Egypt. Don't forget, he was a foreigner. He wasn't an Egyptian. No. An Israelite, a Jew. Why? Because dexterity can override all kind of racial implications, racial barriers, the cultural barriers. The world is looking for people with skill, dexterity. And there was a need in Egypt. In other words, remember I said, your skill set, your dexterity creates demand. So there was a demand for interpretation, and Joseph stepped up. Of course, he was humble enough to acknowledge it was God what gifted him. In fact, he says, well, it's not man to do it. It is God who gives what the interpretation of dreams, which is very important. It helps us to always remember that it is not in our own selves. It is God himself who works in and through us. So we must keep humble. But here, so Joseph here secures a place. Is now become a prime minister of Egypt. Not because of the color of his skin, not because of the culture, no, because of his dexterity. So dexterity designated the destiny for Joseph. Moving on from there, let's look at the man called Moses. Moses now comes at a time when the children of Israel, they are in bondage in Egypt. In Exodus chapter number 3, we are going to observe there a very interesting passage, really. And so we are told, observe these words, okay? I'm going to read from verse number 7. Exodus chapter 3, from verse number 7. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt. And I've heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. So I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from that land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Verse 9. Observe verse 9. Now, therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. 10, come now, come now. Moses, come now. Why is Moses coming this time around? Don't forget, Moses this time is shepherding the flock. He's just going about his own business here, shepherding the flock of his father-in-law. But God now said, hey, look, there is a demand for somebody like you. There is demand for your dexterity, demand for your skill set, demand for your knowledge, demand for your own expertise to be brought to bear for the sake of the children of Israel. They are in Egyptian bondage here. Watch this. So I have come down, says the Lord, verse number 2, come now, therefore, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of here. I'm sending you. So Moses is now partnered with God here. Okay? Very, very important. Now watch this. What's going on? Later on, Moses was able to stand before Pharaoh and the children of Israel were delivered. Now, let's observe something that's very important here that for us to put things in context. Why Moses? Let's look at his own credentials, if you will. Okay? Acts of the Apostles, chapter number 7. Acts of the Apostles, I'm going to read chapter number 7 here, verse 22. The book of Acts of the Apostles, chapter number 7. I'm going to read verse 22 in the interest of time. Observe these words. Okay? It says, and Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was mighty in words and deeds. Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. You remember he was brought up in the house of Pharaoh. Now don't make a mistake here. Just because the guy was brought up in Pharaoh's home, then that in itself made him to be weird. No. Well, in as much as your home can be close to Harvard, to Yale, or any prestigious school, institution. That in itself does not make you to be a learned person, a professor. Just like in the same way, just the fact that maybe your home is located with a mechanic, that doesn't make you to be a mechanic. You got to study. So he made a choice. Again, remember, decisions. It decorates destiny. He disciplined himself whilst in Egypt, in Pharaoh's home. He studied. Okay? Here. So Moses' destiny is not by default. Neither is the destiny of Joseph by default. Both of them, they work toward that. Even Christ himself, he endured the pain of the cross. The life he lived, his sinless life, his death on Calvary's cross, the resurrection, the ascension, all these won our salvation. So salvation did not just, Christ did not just become a savior by doing nothing. He did something about it. That's what destiny is all about. Let's observe one more person here from the Old Testament. His name is David. Oh, there is a battle going on right now. And Israel, everybody's shaking. Why? There is a man called Goliath. The folks who were enlisted serving in the military, they are afraid they can't rise up to the occasion. What happened? Now, observe these words. In 1 Samuel chapter number 17, at verse number 37 here. Okay? 1 Samuel chapter number 17, let me read verse number 37. Observe these words. Moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. Look at the confidence here. In verse number 6, the verse before that, he says, your servant has killed both lion and bear. David says that. That's skill, that's expertise. He has a technical know-how. So he's not just talking from the blues here, okay? This is not just some esoteric talk. No. There is concrete evidence for him to back up what he's saying here, okay? And I say, according, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. I love David. He said, no, I can't just stay put here. You know, he had been sent there just to give his brothers some food supplies. To be sent by the father. But not knowing that his dexterity was about to designate his destiny. It is from that time that Saul got to know David. He said, whose son is this youth? Wow. And the women, oh dear. The next chapter, first chapter number 18, the women become, women don't take time. They start singing. Saul has killed 1,000, but David has killed thousands. You know what's going on? In essence, they're implying here, the destiny of David is much more profound than the destiny of Saul. Why? Because of their skill level, the dexterity. The dexterity of Saul is incomparable to the dexterity of David. No wonder he became one of the, if not, the most formidable king Israel has ever had. That's why David, Israel, on their flag, national flag, they have the Star of David. The guy has a record to show for it from the scriptures. Okay? And so, let's pick up one person here from the New Testament. Okay? We want to talk about Christ here. Let's look at the other person here to buttress the point. Let's consider the man called Paul. You know, Paul was not one of the 12 disciples. Never. He did not walk with Christ. It was Peter and the rest, the 12 of them. And now, Christ really is crucified, buried, resurrected, and ascended to heaven. In Acts chapter number 9, God, Christ himself, confronts Paul. And I love this. And he says in verse number, in verse number 3, okay, of Acts chapter number 9. Say, as he journeyed and he came near Damascus, and suddenly a light shone around him from heaven. Then he fell to the ground. And the word says, so, why are you persecuting me? Huh? They say, who are you, Lord? He said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Now, brethren, listen. At this point, Paul or Saul is really an enemy of those of the way, of Christians. But Christ himself, my goodness, he said, no, I need this guy. I need this guy. What this guy knows, it's just indispensable. I need this guy. And I love really what God said in verse number 15. Christ says in verse number 15, telling Ananias. Now, by the way, this guy, Ananias, is one of the established Christians. Okay, we'll lead us. But observe these words, how Christ is going to convince him. Verse number 15, Acts chapter 9, verse number 15. But the Lord, let me read verse number 13, just to help us. Then Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard from many about this man, how much harm he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. And here he has authority from the chief priest to bind all who call on your name. Verse 13, observe this 15 rather. Verse. But the Lord said to him, go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name before Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel. My interest is the first decision, Gentiles. Elsewhere, Paul says, I am an apostle to the Gentiles, just as Peter is an apostle to the Jews. So, Why Paul? Now, we know Paul was a very learned individual. Just like Moses, we learned everything. Paul was learned in the philosophy, okay, especially of the Greeks, okay? So he could reason with kings. He had what it took at the time, really, to engage in a rational discourse, rational conversation with the leaders. So this guy can talk with you, because to speak with the Gentiles, oh boy, you better know what you're talking about. And Christ says, I found a man, this man called Saul. He will stand before Gentiles, stand before kings, and of course the children of Israel. This is very, very important. But remember, salvation is the Jew first. But the way here Christ begins, it is not by default, it's not coincidence, by coincidence if you will, that it begins to mention the Gentiles, kings, and the Israelites. Remember when Jesus said to the apostles, Acts 1, chapter number 1, verse number 8, you shall receive power, the Holy Ghost has come upon you, and you shall be witness for me in Jerusalem, in Judea, in Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. It begins with the Jews, okay, in Jerusalem here, and moving on to Judea, okay. You're going out really, Samaria, with the Samaritans. But now, as Christ is now commissioning Paul, he said, no, he's my chosen vessel. The Gentiles, the kings, and the Jews. It's a reversal of the commissioning. But what's going on? The dexterity. Remember, Christ took time and taught the apostles. Based on what he taught them, they had the dexterity, the knowledge, they had the expertise to undertake the gospel commission, as it were. Okay? And so he said, he appointed the 12 that they might be with him and that they might send them. Okay? So also, because of his dexterity, he was distinguished. Let me ask a question. What dexterity do you have? What expertise, what knowledge, what skill set do you have that's going to designate you to your particular destiny? Remember this. If dexterity designates your destiny, then it stands to reason that you and I, we have to pay attention to beefing up, to improving, developing our expertise, our dexterity, our skill set. The more we do that, by default, you are also improving on your destiny. Remember, it's a law, it's a principle. It can work anywhere. It can work in any continent, among any people. What you know is what you are known for. Friend, take your time. But more importantly, remember this. Destiny has a twofold components, as I see it here, okay? There is the earthly component and there is the heavenly component. The earthly component that we are emphasizing here cannot pay any dividends ultimately, except you also consider the ultimate heavenly destiny. And that one comes about. You enroll or you locate, secure, designated destiny by coming to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. Remember we said at the beginning of the presentation, he is the only mediator between God and mankind. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I invite you. I challenge you. If you've never made a decision to receive Christ, make that decision. Walk with him. Obey his word. Enter in a relationship with him, and your life will never be the same. I hope you've enjoyed and you've been blessed and transformed through these things that we have shared here. Remember, dexterity designates destiny. And I hope to see you joining me in next week if Christ tarries. God bless you and thanks for listening.